What's the most disturbing secret you've discovered about someone close to you? I don't know how disturbing this is. It turned out pretty fantastic for one, but not for another. I was adopted and told a silly, magical story about my birth parents that most certainly did not seem true even when I was a child. At 57, I learned I was the result of a college affair between a very seriously Jewish young man and a very Baptist young woman. She was rushed off to a home for wayward girls to give birth. He followed her there, many states away, begging her to keep me and live a life together. But their families both said absolutely not. Jewish people were not viewed as white in the mid-60s, and her family most certainly did not want her marrying a non-white. Plus, she was a very committed Christian and did not want to convert to Judaism. So off I went, into another family. I recently discovered 3 lovely half-siblings and we are all pro or semi-pro musicians and get along well. I never got to meet my mother, she died a year before I searched. My father is out of the picture and wants to be left alone. And I'm fine with that. I'm grateful for the love he gave me. It was enough. Another person that was in my non-bio family was also adopted. She was older than me. She tracked down her mom later in life, too. She was in a hospital and had been since the day she was born. She was born holistically disabled, physical, mental, cognitive, learning, sensory, and was graped by an orderly. And she discovered she was the result. Ending star searching are not always happy. While my cousin was walking around with her son in the woods, she came across a hunting stand. She climbed it and found a pair of binoculars. Sitting straight forward and lifting the binoculars to her eyes, she saw her own bedroom window. Let's be logical here. If it was a legit hunting stand, it was facing and closer than 500 feet to a residence, which is illegal, which means it had to come down with prejudice. If it was a peeping Tom, well, it had to come down with prejudice. When my brother and I visited not long after, she showed us where it was. We tore it down and literally wrapped it around a couple trees. Bent the ducker to complete uselessness. I got an angry call the next day. Did you tear down a hunting stand yesterday, duck? Yeah, I did. That was your uncle's, her mother's brother. Turns out my cousin reported it to the family and they ignored the issue. When the uncle was asked, he said there was just an old tree house out there. Even when he was exposed, they didn't really care. They were more upset about the damage we did. Suffice it to say I have written off most of that side of the family. Edit, the uncle in question is now dead. Died 6/16. I was pretty close with my youngest uncle growing up, at least in pictures. He was in his mid-20s when I was like 5 for context. One day when I was in middle school he just stopped coming around completely. My entire family told us kids that he was backpacking around the nation. In high school I was going a genealogy project on my grandfather, his dad, and accidentally found my uncle's name on the 6 offender registry. Come to find out he was running a CP ring and had served 16 years in federal prison. He's out now and my family pretends nothing happened. I stay far away. That my mom cheated on my dad for 20 years and still hasn't told him to this day. I'm still trying to figure out what to do and how to go about the situation and exposing the truth about her to my dad, but I'm afraid he would die of a broken heart. Worst thing is, she cheated with my godfather who used to come to the house and drink coffee with my mom and dad every day. As a kid who found out that one parent was cheating on the other, there is no good time to tell them. My brother, 14, and I, 18, both discovered that our dad was cheating on our mom separately and kept putting off telling her for over a year because it was Christmas and then she had a business trip and then it was her birthday and then it was this and then it was that, etc. One day, I got in trouble and my dad said you're a disgrace to this family and out flew the words that he and mom were not prepared for. I know it's hard. I know it will change everything if you tell your dad or confront your mom. Just wanted to give you some solidarity. Met a super nice guy at a networking event when I just starting out in tech. He had a ton of connections and was a nice family man. Super rich. Eventually we became friends and he was acting as a mentor figure to me in the industry. Went over to his massive new house, met his family, etc. He had the demeanor and looked like Al Borland from Home Improvement, to give you an idea. Like 4 years later I was looking at the 6 offender registry map for my local area while I was shopping for houses. Lo and behold, his house popped up. In the early 2000s he was convicted of co-running a commercial child porn sales site. Served 5 years for it in federal prison. After my husband died in 2020 I found out he had been having an affair with a 30-year-old. He was 55. She apparently aborted his baby. Everything he told me about his prior life was a lie. Second marriage for both of us. And he had been having sex with men since he was in his early 20s. To sum it up, I didn't know this man at all. We had been together 10 years and married for 6. Wait. He was having an affair with a woman, got her pregnant and having sex with men too? Where do people find this kind of time? He was an executive who left home at the crack of dawn. He was leaving work at 2 to meet this woman. Visiting men at bathhouses downtown at lunch. He never went out at night. It's doable. Unbelievable but doable. The 24 hours before my dad died, stage 4 lung cancer, he was in the ER and then the ICU and we were unable to be with him because of hospital COVID rules. My mother, sister and myself had been texting and calling him all day and got no response. My mother even called the hospital and spoke with one of his ICU nurses who said he was awake and communicating fine. He passed very quickly at 3:30 AM the next morning. We were allowed to be at his bedside but by then he was no longer conscious so we said our goodbyes and he was gone. Later that morning while my mom slept I was calling cremation services to schedule his body for pickup at the hospital and going through his bag of belongings the hospital had returned to us. His phone was in there and I wanted to read all our texts and take some comfort in my last words to him. I opened his phone and all our texts had not been read, not mine or my mom and sister's. I thought this was so odd but figured he must have been suffering so much he couldn't find the strength. I began to scroll through his apps and noticed a chat app I'd vaguely heard of. I can't recall the name but it essentially works like WhatsApp. I opened the app and saw a single contact with a female name. I started reading and realized my dad has been chatting with this girl hourly for the last 24 hours and as far back as I could scroll. He was calling her princess and telling her he loved her and she was saying she was scared for him and wanted to know what was going on, why was he in the ER, etc. I scrolled back enough to know that this was someone he was having at the very least, an emotional affair with. My grief was completely hijacked by hurt and anger and a week later I tracked the girl down and spoke to her, via DMS, and found out she was 19 years old. She was 17 when they met. He was her high school bus driver and she told me they had been dating for almost 2 years. My dad was 66 years old when he died and dating someone younger than his grandchildren, someone he chose to spend his last moments with and say his last goodbyes to. I hope it made him happy but it sure is a shitty secret to live the rest of my life with. A secret that will forever overshadow my entire relationship with my dad with no chance to ever speak to him about it. It's the one secret I wish I'd never found out. A work colleague appeared on the front page of a national newspaper for a life of fraudulent qualifications. He claimed medical and law degrees, was a brigadier in the Army Reserves, and was the CEO for a major Heath fund. He actually was a brigadier in the Army Reserves but that and the Heath fund role were largely built on the fraudulent qualifications and a progression of jobs also based on these claims. In reality, the only qualification he actually held was as a mortuary assistant. Not even his wife knew. The fraudulent degrees had been gained when he was in the Army Reserves recruiting and he had access to submitted position applications. He came undone when he applied for a government job and some flags were raised by the recruitment people. He tried to withdraw the application but didn't realize that an application for a government role has the same weight as a statutory declaration and cannot be withdrawn. It all went south very quickly and he ended up doing jail time. A former friend of mine from childhood was a youth pastor at a summer church camp. Turns out he was grooming young girls and teens both at camp and online after camp was over. Only reason I found out was back in 2011. He was in his late 20s at the time. One of the girls told her parents and the cops posed as her online while he masturbated into a webcam. The cop then convinced him to drive 3 hours to go meet and hook up. When he showed up at the girl's place in the middle of the night, the cops were waiting and arrested him. He's now a convicted sex offender and did time in jail. The crazy part? Once he got out, he moved to Texas and married a divorcee that had kids. He's also now the dean of online studies at his church and is responsible for growing the number of students taking classes online. She was my best friend of 7 years. We had literally been through it all together. I moved out of state with my now husband, but she convinced us both to move back to be closer with her, after about a year. We had no real ties to the state we had tried out, so we said screw it, let's go back, she's basically family. We were also happy to be reunited. She was over almost every night for dinner. We all laughed and talked and had a blast. Best year of my life. Then slowly, she started trying to turn my husband and I against each other. Anytime we had an argument, like any couple does, she would text each of us about how right we were, trying to foster animosity between the two of us. With me, she started talking about how she had a plan B for us, that if my husband and I couldn't make it work, I could move in with her and we'd live happy lives together. With my husband, she started talking about her infertility issues and how she wanted to have a kid just like him. She just needed a sperm donor. This all happened at around the same time, and my husband and I compared texts and figured it out. She wanted to take his sperm and have a baby with me. When confronted about it, she refused to admit anything and started lashing out at both of us. It got to the point where she would show up unannounced, banging on the door, demanding a place in our home. It was so terrifying and panic-inducing that we ended up having to move and change our phone numbers. I guess it's so disturbing because I had never had a friend like her, only to find out that she cared about me, but in such an unhealthy and scary way. But yeah, that's my story. Husband and I are great now BTW. My brother was stealing money from father who had dementia. This went on for a year and I found out about it was because the bank who had my father's mortgage called me wondering why it hadn't been paid in 6 months. My father's bank account went into the negative around this time too, and when I confronted my brother about it, he said, well, I gotta pay my bills. I was about to take control of all the accounts and make sure shit got back on track, but my father ended up in the hospital and died shortly after that. My brother also stole some of my inheritance too. In the end, he stole over $5,000 from his dying father. I have a brother actively stealing money from my parents. He's a do-nothing, a liar, and a stoner, and my parents are huge enablers because they don't want to be mean. So they let him steal even though they know about it. They confronted him once and he said, calm down, it's not that big of a deal. Dementia runs through my family. I'm honestly expecting to get zero money when my parents pass because my brother will have stolen it all and spent it on Drew Gus and video games and KFC. Cousin who played Santa at the family Christmas gathering was arrested for child pornography. Police report said the garden's officers were disturbed due to the young age of the subjects in the video. After reading parts of his charts that were released to the public, he's not coming near anyone in the family again. Thought I might see him at our grandma's funeral last month, but very glad I didn't. Friend of mine in school. We weren't best friends or anything, but we hung out, and I went over to his house a few times. Lost touch after school ended and went to college. Found out a few years later he'd been convicted of ownership of child and extreme pornography. Turns out he'd discovered it on his dad's computer, and both ended up being convicted at the same time. The mum wife was apparently none the wiser until police raided the house. Makes me shudder to think, having been round there, how long it had been going on for. I was pretty good friends with this guy who ran a hobbyist cafe, basically a place where you could play trading card games, board games and that sort of thing. Every Saturday he offered a service where he'd put on children's days, which would usually involve watching movies on the projector, Pokemon tournaments, etc. It was great for a lot of the local parents in the area who could use the day to complete their chores with their kids out of the house, and so there was always 20 or so kids in there every week. But then a few years back, it was revealed he had approximately 1 TB of illicit CP on his computer. According to the news, there was no evidence he manufactured any, which gives me the slightest ray of hope that at least the kids who went there every Saturday were never exploited, but the fact he could do that was horrific. I wasn't close to this person, but I did hang out with them a few times. The best man at my wedding had another really close friend who turned out to be a serial killer. It messed him up really badly. He already had mental health issues and this sent him over the edge. I can't even talk to him anymore. I miss you, man. Graduated boot camp and wondered why my brother wouldn't talk to me. Turns out he was ducking my ex while I was there instead of delivering my letters. Guess guilt ate him up and he thought it was simpler to keep up the lie and not have a brother, right up until an old friend from my hometown told me what happened. When I was young, I had vague ideas about my uncle being dodgy. In that at family events such as weddings etc, my parents would tell me and some of my cousins to stay away from him. When I was in year 8, we were doing a lesson in citizenship class where we had to cut out pieces from a newspaper, no idea why, and I came across an article saying he'd been recommitted to Broadmoor prison. Went home and googled him and found out he'd been in prison in the 80s for kidnapping and raping someone, and had been in and out of prison since for other offenses. He also tried to sue the Sun once for defamation since they printed something incorrect about him. He was awarded 1p by the court because it technically was defamation, but it was agreed that what they had printed couldn't have damaged his reputation any further. All I know is that he was in a halfway house for a long time. However, from what I've gathered, he was released around 5 years ago. My mother got very drunk one day and confessed to me that my father raped her and that's how she became pregnant with me. Empathy. My mom told me the same about my bio dad. They were married, but it was still great. I wish I didn't know. I found this out about myself when I was 12 and asked my mom why she treats me like didn't want me. She was totally sober and looking at me with the same twisted disgust she always did when no one else was around and she didn't have to put on a show. Edit. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned this. I confronted my dad and he was completely shocked at the accusation and was perceivably very hurt by it. I confronted my mother later in life and she changed her tune to, well, I didn't feel like having sex but your father kept wanting to, so I just let him. And he wasn't coercing her or bullying her into it. He'd put the moves on her, she'd turn him down. Eventually she was like, oh, okay. I found out when I was an adult that my mother didn't just abandon me one day after work like I had been led to believe. Turns out she had been gang raped. She said they took her wallet and made a disgusting comment about my picture inside. I would have been a toddler at this time, and she was just too scared to go home. She said they followed her. She said when it was over and my stepdad took her to the hospital, they had to stitch everything back together down there. She spent that time away on and off the psych ward. My mom and me still have a rocky relationship for reasons beyond this, but I definitely understand her better. She's had issues with drinking and her mental health all my life, and I really think it's because she's never sought proper help for what happened to her. Underneath all that trauma, drinking, and grief, is my mother. And she's one of the most beautiful souls that'll ever walk this earth. For clarification, she stayed in my life. Just my grandparents raised me. There was a lot of other drama as well, but none of it worth getting into. One night as a kid I heard my parents having an explosive argument in their bedroom which suddenly went quiet. The door was closed and locked. I found out during a drunk phone call from my mother it was because she attempted to shoot my father in the face with a .303, but it didn't go off when she pulled the trigger as there were no bullets. They were both horrified and just stared at each other apparently. They're still together. Last year my great aunt, Paternal grandma, her sister, told the family she couldn't live with the secret anymore. My paternal grandmother and her sister are 10 years apart. My grandmother had been married from 20 to a government official, which is my grandfather. My grandfather moved the entire family from a poor country to Europe. My great aunt told the entire family that from being 10 years to being 19 years, my grandfather raped her every single day and told her that if she told anyone about it he would immediately move the entire family back and cancel their paperwork. When confronted, my grandfather didn't even say he didn't do it, he just walked away and said the past doesn't matter. My grandfather is a ghost on paper. We always grew up knowing he had skeletons in his closet, but I wasn't prepared for what he had done in his younger years. I started hearing rumors as a teen that he had been a pretty big time robber. His speciality was cracking the safes, but he would never admit it. In 2016 he randomly told me he also used to deal gums to the IRA like he was talking about the weather. It was bizarre. He also told me he helped a couple of triads hide out in Jamaica after they went on the run for beheading an adversary. They were fairly nice guys according to him. It was only about 10 years ago he finally stopped sleeping with gums stashed under his bed and taking shady phone calls down the bottom of the garden. Only my grandmother knows his real name, no one else in the family does. I adore him, but he is an enigma to me. Out of my group of friends in high school, they all got strung out on meth. They had a story that a friend of mine was almost raped, so she pulled her knife and killed this guy. Her and some other strung out friends claimed to have buried the body, and that the guy wouldn't be missed since he had no family that knew his whereabouts. I have no idea what the truth is, but they were kind of hush hush about the situation until it eventually got back to me. My coworker. I always thought he was a little strange, but he was the head underwriter, so eventually we become kinda close. I got a call from a buddy of his that was concerned. At that point I told his buddy that the guy had quit the job 2 weeks before. The buddy asked me if I could check on him at his house. He said he would check, but he lives 2 hours away from him. I checked, and some older guy told me that he was okay but that I wouldn't hear from him for a while. Fast forward 1 week, I get a call that he had been arrested for child pornography. My brother was a US military policeman 30 years ago. He recently admitted he wasn't stationed in an undisclosable location while in the armed forces. Instead, he was actually in prison for manslaughter. He got into an off-duty drunken dispute in a bar. My baby brother beat a man with a pool cue, then stomped him to death when the bouncer told him and the victim to take it outside. Ex-roommate and good friend got kicked out for not paying rent. A couple months later, a girl goes missing after her shift at Wendy's and turns up murdered. Guy confesses while on mushrooms to police and is released due to his condition when admitting it. Ran into him a couple weeks after and I could tell something was up. Turned himself in sober the next day. I used to go to work, leaving my girlfriend at the house with him. You think you know someone. Looking back 15 years later, and it all adds up. I said something in general about horses one time. My good friend just kinda shrugged and said, "Huh. My uncle got ducked to death by a horse. What the hell?" Turns out my friend's uncle was the MR. Hands guy from the Seattle area. My friend was like, "Oh yeah, there's a whole movie about it and everything. It's called Zoo. Some town called Enumclaw, Washington is where this happened." I did look it up to see what he was talking about, since he just blindsided me with the whole story. I don't really know why someone would claim such a thing if it weren't true, but perhaps he just wanted to shock me. We don't really communicate anymore, due to changing jobs. When I was about 17, I found out that my uncle had murdered 3 people and was in prison. It could have actually been more than 3, but he was convicted of 3. During my wife's second trimester, she would stand next to the side of the bed where I slept, holding the black hand axe I use for outdoor stuff and general home defense. She would put the cat in the bathroom and stuff a towel at the bottom so I couldn't hear her scratches or meows. She stated that she would act out striking my neck, then my eyes with some grim details. Our daughter is almost 3, and the cat sleeps on my chest since those days and hisses at her at night when she gets up to use the restroom. I was told this last week, and I don't know how to feel. Finally, I can post this story in one of these. So my now husband, engaged at the time, and I are teachers and did a couple-year stint in bush rural Alaska. It was pretty intense but a great adventure. Learned a lot we wanted and a lot we didn't. We befriended one of our colleagues, an older single man who seemed friendly enough. We would often go over for dinner, go hiking, and go shoot his gum collection at a local rural beach using the school's Honda. Rural life, no animals or local fauna were harmed. He took on the role of an uncle figure for us. We stayed at his Airbnb spare bedroom at his house in the city on vacation. Once, too. Now, our second year teaching there, he brings along this young woman at the start of the school year who he claims is his niece, and she never leaves his house. He claimed she was having trouble living with his brother and she was taking classes online to graduate, and she confirmed this with myself and other women in the village. Cut to spring. She leaves for home separately from this man and people ask why. He claims she patched things up with his brother, her dad, and went home. It turns out this girl was basically an underage girl he met online, and her father tracked her down after she contacted a local woman about her situation and sent a state trooper to escort her home. She had been reported missing for 8 months prior. Ducked up part was, on top of going to court for that situation starting the following summer, he tried to coax another underage girl offline to live with him the following school year, and it turns out that entire chat history was a sting by the FBI. He's in prison now until 2043. My dad hired a hitman to kill the guy that organized his kidnapping. He told me at some point, willing take the chance of it ruining my image of him. I know what he went through. He had PTSD from it and was just never the same after it. He became more paranoid as well. I told him I was proud of him. The guy was a career criminal anyway. In my eyes it was one less bad guy in the world. My dad's dead now, so it's whatever if I share this. I used to go to Disneyland a lot and hung out at the piano on Main Street where the piano player was a good friend of mine. A lot of people did. In particular, there was one fellow who would come, pushing his elderly mother in a wheelchair. He was about 40 years old and sang like an angel. He'd sing along with the piano player and would draw a small crowd. One day I walked in and the piano player, as soon as he saw me, handed me a newspaper clipping. Turns out the guy who sang along was convicted of statutory rape of multiple students of a dance studio he ran. And during the trial, multiple other girls came forward to claim he had sex with them, too. I have no idea if he ever got out of prison. Discovered that my own mother paid bribes to my then social services worker to make my life a living hell. I was in foster care from 11 to 18 because she was mistreating me. I won't get into the details, but it was physical, psychological and sexual in nature. I was under the state's protection but suddenly got imprisoned without any reason. Got to endure other forms of torture or revenge as well. Finally got a lawyer at 16 yo. He found all the evidences, got in court. She lost the small amount of legal custody she still had. Social services worker got kicked out and banned of his profession, and I got my emancipation. The judge was not amused. I'm 41 and she still try to make my life a living hell once in a while, even if I move. Can't wait for her to just die and live in peace. When I found out that both my best friends from way back were being investigated for domestic terrorism. Or I should say when I was reminded, because apparently this happened while we were still friends and I was aware at the time. We had a lot of other issues, so I guess I decided to throw that one on the back burner. But it says a lot about my high school experience that was the thing I decided to forget. My brother has a former friend that was investigated as a domestic terrorist. Dude was planning a mass casualty event. Thankfully he blew his hands off making a pipe bomb. He had already made a ton of them. FBI and police obviously got involved, and what tipped them off was a nurse who realized dude was lying after he said it was a lawnmower accident. Figured out a few years after I married my first wife that she had had an ongoing sexual relationship with her first cousin before she met me. I figured it out sitting around a campfire with the way they looked at each other. Update due to the interest, I always knew he was her favorite cousin but never knew or suspected anything until that night around the fire. It was just us three at that point and I have always been great at reading people, well except the woman I dated, lol. Anyway, I just saw a look between them and I knew without a doubt and just asked them straight out when they first hooked up. She was so stunned she admitted it instantly and said, "How did you know?" Then she said, "Oh god, I wonder if anyone else in the family figured it out." They slept together off and on for at least 2 years before I met her, but since that time I suspect it was after she met me also. Another fact that was withheld before our marriage was she was bipolar and untreated. Things got back. Lucky to walk away. I divorced her in 2014. I can tell you that as of last year I told a female cousin of hers that hates her guts, so I am sure the family knows now, lol. Backed out of a Miami trip with a group of folks after I found some of them talking trash about others. A new friend I introduced to the group decided to go anyway against my advice. She was raped by a friend of the leader's boyfriend during the trip. Everyone in the shared Airbnb was aware this happened and no one said anything. No one removed the guy. They all blamed the new girl for getting drunk, and since she'd hooked up with the offender in the past, she must have wanted it or been okay with it. The victim didn't want to pursue any legal action because of the way everyone blamed her. I don't associate with anyone who went on that trip anymore, and I'm very vocal as to why when others ask. My grandfather, who I thankfully never met, abused all of my aunts and their friends. They only came forward once they were adults and girls started being born into the family. Their bravery to tell everyone what happened saved all of us girls from the same fate. My ex's dad dated both of his mom's older sisters before dating her. Once they started going out, he proposed to her within 2 weeks. They are still together. He casually brought it up at the dinner table. Really weird. I have 2 older sisters. The thought of a guy dating both of my older sisters than me is just disgusting. My best friend in high school had a brother who was only a year older than her. I wasn't close friends with him or anything, but I always liked him when we were younger, in a friendly way. He was always goofy and seemed kind-hearted, even though he did consistently stay in trouble as a teen. He has had a serious drinking problem ever since middle school. I knew he had some demons, but I never thought he was a bad guy. Well, anyway. I lost touch with my friend for a few years after high school. But, when we ran into each other a while back, we had a long catch-up session. While talking, I couldn't help but notice that she hadn't mentioned her brother at all. That is odd, considering that he has always been present in her life. So I asked about him. Apparently, her brother had raped a 12-year-old boy when he was in his mid-20s. The boy's family found out about it and pressed charges against him. I was absolutely shocked. I knew he had some serious emotional issues, and I knew he had been dealing with substance abuse, but I never thought he would do something like that. At most, I imagined him being in and out of jail for random, petty drug-related charges. Or maybe even go to prison for a drug-related felony charge. I never thought this was the direction his life would take. My friend said that she thinks his issues make it extremely difficult to have healthy relationships with people his own age. That he feels safer socializing with people much younger. She told me that after the charges were pressed, he was an absolute wreck, as if he were going through a breakup with another adult. It wasn't the charges that bothered him. It was the fact that he seriously considered this kid to be his boyfriend and he didn't want to lose him. Not that this makes anything he did less fucked up. It was just shocking to me to hear just how warped this guy I grew up with was, and I never knew it. All this time, you think you know a guy. They were close to my dad, not me, as I was a child at the time. He would come over and play D&D with my dad and his friends. One night his neighbors phoned the police as he was setting off makeshift fireworks. Eventually, police were able to search his place and found he had been planning on blowing up a mosque, and was inspired by Anders Behring Breivik, a Nazi. My dad gave witness evidence of a time when this friend offered him a stolen piece of wall from Hitler's bunker. In high school I had a friend who I wasn't close with for long, maybe a semester, but we bonded over our mental health struggles at the time. Unfortunately she committed suicide not long later, and it wasn't until years later I learned from her best friend what she was really going through. Her parents divorced because her father came out as gay, and she left with her father because she was also gay and her family had become viciously homophobic towards them. Her own brother spray painted slurs on their home and slashed tires. Her mother at one point pushed her down a staircase and she broke her leg. She also had health issues that contributed to her depression, and one day she had enough. Almost a year to the day she died, her brother also committed suicide, presumably out of guilt. I was told the family was investigated, but the last I heard her mother had started speaking at suicide prevention events.